Genesis 37. Now Jacob lived in the land where his father had sojourned, in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, when 17 years of age, was pasturing the flock with his brothers while he was still a youth, along with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought back an evil report about them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a varicolored tunic. And his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, so they hated him and could not speak to him in peace. Then Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers, so they hated him even more. And he said to them, "Please listen to this dream which I have had. Indeed, behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf rose up and also stood upright. And behold, your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to my sheaf." Then his brothers said to him, "Are you really going to reign over us? Or are you really going to rule over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Then he had still another dream and recounted it to his brothers and said, "Behold, I have had still another dream, and behold, the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." And he recounted it to his father and to his brothers. And his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have had? Shall I and your mother and your brothers really come to bow ourselves down before you to the ground?" And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. Then his brothers went to pasture their father's flock in Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock in Shechem? Come, and I will send you to them." And he said to him, "I will go." Then he said to him, "Go now and see about the welfare of your brothers and the welfare of the flock, and bring word back to me." So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. And a man found him, and behold, he was wandering in the field. And the man asked him, "What are you seeking?" And he said, "I am seeking my brothers. Please tell me where they are pasturing the flock." And the man said, "They have journeyed from here, for I heard them saying, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. And he saw him from a distance, and before he came close to them, they plotted against him to put him to death. Then they said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. So now, come, let us kill him and cast him into one of the pits, and we will say, 'A wild beast devoured him.' Then let us see what will become of his dreams." But Reuben heard this and delivered him out of their hands and said, "Let us not strike down his life." Reuben further said to them, "Shed no blood. Cast him into this pit that is in the wilderness, but do not put forth your hands against him, that he might deliver him out of their hands to return him to his father." Now it happened, when Joseph reached his brothers, that they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the varicolored tunic that was on him, and they took him and cast him into the pit. Now the pit was empty, without any water in it, and they sat down to eat a meal. Then they lifted up their eyes and saw, and behold, a caravan of Ishmaelites was coming from Gilead, with their camels bearing aromatic gum and balm and myrrh, going to bring them down to Egypt. And Judah said to his brothers, "What gain is it that we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and not lay our hands on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers listened. Then some Midianite traders passed by. So they pulled him up and lifted Joseph out of the pit, and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. Thus they brought Joseph into Egypt. Then Reuben returned to the pit, and behold, Joseph was not in the pit. So he tore his garments. Then he returned to his brothers and said, "The boy is not there. As for me, where am I to go?" So they took Joseph's tunic and slaughtered a male goat and dipped the tunic in the blood. And they sent the varicolored tunic and brought it to their father and said, "We found this. Please recognize it, whether it is your son's tunic or not." And he recognized it and said, "It is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." So Jacob tore his clothes and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. Then all his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And he said, "Surely I will go down to Sheol in mourning for my son." So his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, Pharaoh's officer, the captain of the bodyguard. This chapter is full of assumptions made. Verse 8. His brothers said to him, "Are you really going to reign over us?" The implication is that he's not going to reign over us. He will never reign over us. But they don't really know that. It may seem very unlikely, and it's a stab at their ego, but they can never be sure about that. Yet they're already reacting on their assumptions. Verse 8, they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Similarly, from their father, verse 10, his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have had? Shall I and your mother and your brothers really come to bow ourselves down before you to the ground?" And the implication is, that's crazy. Because they couldn't imagine a scenario where they would bow down to Joseph. But the text gives us some anticipation here. Verse 11, his brothers were jealous of him, but in contrast, his father kept the saying in mind. It didn't feel good to imagine themselves bowing down to this 17-year-old boy, but instead of hating on Joseph, his father did keep it in mind, perhaps to see what will actually come out of this. Nonetheless, their father has not changed his ways regarding assumptions. Verse 33, he recognized the tunic and said, "It is my son's tunic." Now that's fine, but then he continues, "A wild beast has devoured him." Well, that's what it looks like, but we can't be sure. Yet he continues, "Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." And once again, an emotional reaction. Verse 35, his father wept for him. Are we also tempted to turn our assumptions into certainties? I have, even in this chapter. I read verse 2, Joseph brought back an evil report about them to their father, and I automatically had a lower view of Joseph. But I didn't even consider something like verse 14, when Joseph's father said to Joseph, "Go now and see about the welfare of your brothers and the welfare of the flock, and bring word back to me." So he sent him. Well, maybe Joseph was just doing his duty. His father sees him as this special favored son, and so he assigned Joseph to be this foreman to supervise his other brothers. So maybe Joseph was just innocently doing his job. The point is, we don't really know. And what about Reuben? Did you make any assumptions about Reuben? Verse 21. Reuben heard this and delivered him out of their hands and said, "Let us not strike down his life." Verse 22, why? That he might deliver him out of their hands to return him to his father. I had a higher view of Reuben after reading that, but perhaps that was an assumption. Let's consider some context. Back in chapter 35, verse 22, Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard of it. Reuben is not set up to be on his father's good side. And so Reuben here, back in chapter 37, verse 22, he tells his brothers to not kill Joseph, but he doesn't tell him the full plan. The quote ends, and it says that Reuben might deliver Joseph out of their hands to return Joseph to his father. It wasn't Reuben trying to convince his brothers, hey, let's not kill him, put him in this pit, and later we will take him out and return him to his father. Reuben was planning to do that secretly, which is consistent with verse 29. Reuben returned to the pit, and behold, Joseph was not in the pit. Reuben was surprised. His plan didn't work. But what's the motive? Well, he could have been the hero. Bring Joseph back to his father, as opposed to being like his other brothers, who was going to leave him in the pit. And then maybe Reuben can share in some of that favoritism that he already had for Joseph and be back on his father's good side. So while the other brothers were willing to sell out one person, Joseph, Reuben was potentially ready to sell out all his brothers and use them to gain favor with his father. Now the text is not explicit, so I can't say for sure that's what Reuben was intending. But did you catch yourself making assumptions? Making Reuben more heroic than he might actually be, without you really knowing from the text? And similarly, did you see Joseph as more evil than he actually is, simply because he gave a bad report about his brothers to their father? And even with Joseph telling them his dreams, there's no mention of Joseph smirking or saying anything deceitful. He was just stating the facts of his dreams. He didn't claim that they will be true or that he was better than anybody else. God allowed him to see these dreams, and who knows? Maybe the meaning of these dreams will actually come true. And even for the meaning, Joseph doesn't necessarily know the meaning. At this point in the story, he's the dreamer. He's not yet the interpreter. So on one hand, we can see that Joseph was a little naive and silly for telling such a quote-unquote obviously triggering dream to his brothers and his father. But on the other hand, this is kind of like a prophecy, assuming indeed that they're going to bow down to Joseph one day. Let's be careful with our assumptions. Let's continue to seek truth, both in God's world and especially in God's word. These are my thoughts. Hope to hear from you as well.